Today is Wednesday, May 1st. I'm Pastor Anthony, and this is Wilderness Wanderings. Today our text comes from 1 Thessalonians 5. Now we ask you, brothers and sisters, to acknowledge those who work hard among you, who care for you in the Lord, and who admonish you. Hold them in the highest regard in love because of their work. Live in peace with each other. And we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive. Encourage the disheartened. Help the weak. Be patient with everyone. Make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always strive to do what is good for each other and for everyone else. That's 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 12 to 15. Paul now turns to conclude the letter. He does so by gathering up the letter's contents and repeating them in a flurry of staccato commands that speak very directly and practically to the life of the church. Earlier in the letter, the Thessalonians have been commended for living in order to please God and for loving one another well. In both cases, they were encouraged to do so more and more. These encouragements came with warnings that the rejection of the apostles' teaching amounted to rejection of God. But they also came with the reminder and hope that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders. The world, in other words, was watching, and by their way of life together, the Thessalonians were preaching. Now Paul reminds them of these things. Acknowledge and hold a high regard for your leaders, he says, those who work, care, and admonish, as the apostles have done through their teaching. Like the work of the apostles, the work of every Christian leader, when carried out faithfully, is an expression of God's own work, care, and admonishment among the community. And as God's own work, even though the admonishment bits might be hard to swallow, it ought always to be understood as a word and work meant to grow us up to maturity in Christ. And just like leaders are an expression of God's work within the congregation, so the congregation itself is an expression of God's work in the world. As such, it is important how the Thessalonians, or any Christians still today, conduct themselves in the world and with one another. So come the next line of commands, to live in peace with one another. This involves engaging those who are idly disengaged, and therefore disruptive, by encouraging them to get involved in productive pursuits, participating in God's own work in the world until the day that Jesus comes again. Our work is a participation in God's work, hearkening back to the Genesis commands to steward and to work and to care for this world. There are other threats to our participation in God's work, though: division and conflict, disease and discouragement. So comes the call then to be patient with one another, to help the weak, to encourage the disheartened, to diffuse conflict before it gets out of hand, and to always strive for each other's good, and indeed, for the good of the society around them. In these ways, the Thessalonians' work joins up with God's own work and preaches God's kingdom gospel ever louder and ever further to a world longing to hear such good news of healthy relationships, divisions that are bridged, the weak being upheld, and the good of all generously and unselfishly striven for. By God's grace and work among us, may our own lives and church preach just that word. As you journey on, go with the blessing of God that comes from the end of this letter that we're about to come to. May God himself, the God who makes everything holy and whole, make you holy and whole, put you together, spirit, soul, and body, and keep you fit for the coming of our Master Jesus Christ. The one who called you is completely dependable. If he said it, he'll do it. The amazing grace of Jesus Christ be with you.